So the first person we have coming up is Jessica Kahn. She's the VP of Product Engineering and Operations for Disney Mobile Games, a division of Disney Interactive Media Group. And she was a member of the executive team at Tapulous. And previous to that, she worked at Apple. So let's welcome Jessica.
Hey, everybody. Thank you. I am not used to one of these mics, so please forgive me. I feel like I'm going to be all thumbs. I've got like a clicker and a mic, and I want to talk with my hands, and this is going to make it complicated. In fact, I'm going to put the clicker down before something dangerous happens. Okay, so let me just preface this by saying I understood the format to be a panel, and so I'm here because I'm an open book for you. I'm hoping that you'll ask a lot of questions after I get down off of the podium, and I'm sitting in a chair there. And so I didn't go into great depth in my slides. It's more of an introduction about who am I, what was Tapulous, what is Disney Mobile Games now, and so you can get a feel for what am I familiar with and what might you be able to ask me about. I'll try to add a little color as I'm speaking because my understanding is my other two speaker friends have a lot more information in their slides, so forgive my dearth of information. I basically started my professional software engineering career at Apple. I had to do a little bit of work after college to learn how to program. I didn't figure out that I wanted to do that until I was a senior, so I didn't have enough time in school to become professional enough to start that right away. So I shored up my skills for a couple of years after school doing some random things, and then Apple hired me as an entry-level software engineer. I was there for almost 10 years doing software engineering, always on Mac OS X, always on internet-connected pieces of the operating system. I eventually ended up running a team that built Safari RSS, which was the first incarnation of RSS in a web browser. I've done a whole bunch of other bits of software too, login window, mail, Safari, help, you name it. I've touched a lot of that code. So that was my time at Apple. But while I was there, I always knew I wanted to understand more about why I was making the products I was making. I was given incredible opportunities to work with really smart people and build amazing products that touched tens of millions of people, but I never understood the business rationale behind it, and I was always curious about that. So I always knew I would sort of leave someday to sow my wild startup oats, and at an interesting point in mid-2008, when in fact the startup ecosystem out here was looking awfully shaky. Some of you may remember there was a Sequoia memo that went out around that time that was saying, funding is dead, you're not getting any money. And it was right that week that I decided to leave Apple and join Tapulous. So you may remember Tapulous was an early darling of the App Store. It was most famous for its game series Tap Tap Revenge. And Tapulous was ultimately acquired by the Walt Disney Company in July 2010. So I'll talk a little bit about both of those companies in my next couple slides. And then during this ride, I also have the distinct honor of having been named one of Fast Company's most influential women in technology. So that's an exciting thing for me, and that's me. Thank you so much. Okay, so Tapulous, as I said, one of iTunes App Store's early darlings. We actually had multiple products in the App Store on day one when it opened. And the co-founders of that company were non-technical, but they certainly had an eye for what was going to hit and what was going to hit big. So what they did actually before they had anyone running their engineering staff was go out into the jailbreak community and buy up apps. And this was before the App Store opened. Knowing that an App Store would be coming, or at least hedging their bets that it would be coming, they bought dozens and dozens of apps in the jailbreak community and then owned the code wholly. And then when the App Store did come, and they knew it was coming, they hired engineers to convert that stuff to be App Store compliant, and they shipped a bunch of apps into the App Store on day one, including one Tap Tap Revenge. So if you look back at the early days of Tap Tap Revenge, when I showed up on the scene, it had been in the App Store for a few months already. It had about 3 million users, and I'm not joking that it was 90% in one source file. It was it was a very interesting engineering challenge, but a great product, right? It took off like wildfire because it married really simplistic gameplay that was just perfect for the medium, right? It just felt so good to tap on those 3 targets. It married that with music, which is just sort of a universal social glue, right? And it had a little bit of a social layer in there too. So this thing just took off, and it became #1, quite dominant in the App Store for the first couple years of the App Store. So, we realized that this thing was taking off right around when I joined Tapulous, and while we initially were a social app company, Tapulous, with its a couple dozen offerings, we then pivoted pretty immediately, realizing we had to back our winning horse, and we became a game company. So, going forth, Tap Tap Revenge ended up named in the Guinness Book of World Records as the most popular iPhone game series of all time. That hasn't been updated of late, right? So my guess is Angry Birds or some such might have overtaken us, but we have that claim to fame until they update the book. Otherwise, in 2008, it was the 2nd most downloaded app in the App Store of anything, free, paid, game, otherwise. And it was the most downloaded game. And then in 2009, we were very proud of the idea that 1 in 3 iPhone and iPod Touch users had installed Tap Tap Revenge. I mean, it's pretty amazing to walk around and think anyone you see with an iDevice at that time, 1 in 3 of them had played my game or was playing my game. So really fun time at Tapulous, really incredible rocket ship to have climbed on. And that led me to Disney Mobile Games. So 2010, Disney decides that they want to buy us. And I can only speculate sort of what the reasoning was, right? But if I were sitting in a chair at Disney and I were looking at what iPhone startup I might want to buy, I would have picked Tapulous because we had a strong executive team that could take over an existing mobile business unit at Disney that hadn't quite found its footing yet. But we also had this very popular game and a network of users behind it, right? Everything did have this social glue and this relatively sizable backend. So we had a lot of interesting data about people, and we could conceivably use those people as a target audience to cross-promote to, right? So I think it was a couple of different reasons that they bought us. So fast forward to today, myself and my boss, Bart, who is the GM of Disney Mobile Games, as well as a third of the 4th Tapulous executives, Tim O'Brien, we're all still at Disney. We're all helping to run this business unit, and Tim actually runs business development for our entire division now. So we're doing well, we're enjoying ourselves. And we're producing some pretty great products, right? So here you see just a smattering of our offerings, right? There's Where's My Perry, there's Where's My Water, there's Fix-It Felix, and Temple Run Brave. The bottom one happens to be published under the Disney label, but it's not Disney Mobile Games, so that's a little nuance that maybe I'll talk to later. It's an interesting thing, right? Disney is a mega multinational if you've ever seen one. I mean, we're something like 160,000 employees. So you can't really control mobile development across an organization that big. Everybody knows that mobile is where they want to be. And so everybody's heading there, and they're all heading there without sort of wanting to check in with us about it. So what we figured out, right, was when we first joined Disney, we thought, okay, we're Disney Mobile. We didn't even have the games part of our name attached, right? And we came on board and we thought, excellent. We know the most about mobile. That's why Disney bought us. So we're going to have everything mobile come through us. And we'll control that, and we'll, overall increase its quality, and we'll make everything better. We tried that for about a year, and I swear my head exploded multiple times. It was just not possible. So now the wisdom of 2.5 years at Disney has led us to, you know what? We're happy to liaise with you folks who are making other mobile products. We're happy to advise you. We will provide all kinds of shared technologies if you would like to use them. We'll support you with our quality organization, but we are not going to try to control you. And so other people ship things like, for instance, this Watch Disney app, and we help them, but we don't own it. Anyway, so a little aside, because if you guys go off into the App Store and start to search for things Disney, you're going to find dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens. Most of them aren't ours. A couple dozen that are recently released games, those are ours. As you can see from this list here, we care about quality. So we actually, you can't control it in that you can't say, I'm never going to ship anything that's less than 4.5 stars, because you don't always know how it's going to work out once it goes into the marketplace. But we have a stated goal that nothing goes out that's below 4.5 stars. And if something is below 4.5 stars, we focus all due effort and attention on increasing its star rating. It's very important to our brand value and sort of the commitment we have to we call them guests at Disney, not customers or users, the commitment to our guests, that they have an awesome experience with our products. And so 4.5 stars is where it's at for us. Okay, so what is Disney Mobile Games? You've heard me talk a little bit about the context that it's in, this giant multinational corporation. It's 3 studios with headquarters in Palo Alto, and that's sort of grandfathered in from the fact that Tapulous was based in Palo Alto. So we have, give or take on any given week, about 50 people in each of our locations. We've got Palo Alto, we've got one in Southern California, which is where a lot of West Coast Disney stuff is going on, and we've got one in Prague in the Czech Republic. And I've had a lot of fun at Disney getting to branch out into more than just engineering. I've actually at times run the Prague office directly, and so gotten to do quite a lot of international travel and learning how to deal with international teams. And I currently actually am assisting in running the Palo Alto office. All right. We've released some figures. Given that I'm Disney, I probably can't be too revealing about, specifics, especially figures, but these come from press releases that we did in December. So we had 15 million downloads of our games in the 7 days starting December 22nd this past year in the holiday season. And that accounted for 7.5 million DAUs, which was a 400% increase year over year. So it's a pretty healthy ecosystem for us. It's pretty lively. It's growing, absolutely. Current major titles, as you saw from the previous image, we care a lot about the Where's My Water franchise. Now, this has a particular spot in our hearts because it's the first time that anything mobile at Disney has created IP or a character or a story and given that back to the Walt Disney Company. Now, if you've ever worked for or with the Walt Disney Company, you know that one of its, sort of paramount values is about character and story in addition to quality. And so we're just so proud that we've created Swampy and Cranky and Allie and the whole story behind them. And in fact, the Walt Disney Company has latched on. So there are videos you can watch online as well as on television. I went to Orlando for a business meeting and took my family out to dinner, and Swampy was on the kids menu. So he's showing up all over the place, and he'll be showing up more and more. It's also the Disney Company, so it takes a long time for these wheels to grind, but I suspect that there'll be more physical presence for him in consumer products as well as in the parks in the future. So we're proud of that. Temple Run Brave, that's sort of a new, I don't know, it's not fair to call it a genre, but it's a new type of effort that we're doing where we collaborate with other major game makers on the platform. So in this case, Imanji. And we take what is a very successful title of theirs and blend it with our IP, and then often notch up the tech a little bit, notch up the production value a little bit, and then we mutually benefit. So Temple Run Brave was a great example of that that's been doing really, really well. We also did one with Get Set Games recently, which was Monsters Run, and that was released over Christmas. And then, of course, Tap Tap Revenge is still there, right? It's sort of our 800-pound gorilla that is always sitting in the corner. It's not really what we're focused on, to be honest, as Disney, right? Because it doesn't share in some of the values that I was just talking about. But it's still a really important part of the equation. It still brings with it a tremendous network value of active users that are in that game every day. And it brings with it monetary value, not just network value, right? We drive a lot of advertising through there, a lot of sponsorships, banner ads, other kinds of promotions, and cross-promotion to the rest of our products. Recent entrance into our list of titles, you saw Fix-It Felix, a companion to that, an expansion of that was Wreck-It Ralph. That was tied to a movie release, so we do those as well. Prior to arriving at Disney, that was primarily what this business unit was doing, was marketing apps that were in support of some other business unit's release, often a movie. Now we sort of pick and choose our opportunities there, and so we do them, but we do them with all of the importance and all of the values that we give to all of our other original product, right? So they all have to meet that same standard of 4.5 stars and beautiful experiences and do justice to the IP that they're using. So Wreck-It Ralph is a great example of that. It did real well. Nemo's Reef, which is obviously a Finding Nemo IP, and that thing is in the App Store right now. It's sort of a reef builder. Very beautiful, and as I mentioned, Monsters Incorporated Run. So I think that this is the end of my intro. I know I haven't shared all that much with you about how we got to where we are, but I hope I've sparked some questions in your heads. And then, as I said, I'll be sitting over there and more than happy to try to answer them. So,
great. Thank you, Jessica. And so next we have Michael Sanford, who will come up and tell us a little bit about Flipside 5. And Michael Sanford is a software engineering background, and he founded his current company prior to the App Store launch to build the best-of-breed software for the iPhone. They produce games in iOS, and they have 10 titles with over 70 million downloads. Their most popular game to date, which I'm sure you've seen, is Touch Hockey, which Apple listed last year as the 20 most downloaded free app of all time. And previously, Michael founded a development company, has been a consultant in the financial services sector. So welcome to Michael.
All right, thank you. All right, so my name is Michael Sanford, founder and CEO of Flipside 5. A little background on myself is I've had an engineering background. I was an Apple guy from when I was very young. To show my age, I had an Apple II. And that's where I started to learn software development. During the 90s, I was a software consultant and worked with Next Computer Technology. And so I was very familiar with Objective-C and those APIs when the iPhone came out. All right. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to talk just briefly on Flipside 5. When Steve Jobs announced the iPhone was going to be coming out in January of 2007, I thought it was going to be a big event in the industry, and I wanted to do something. And my son was 5 years old at the time, and he said, we were driving the car, he said, "Dad, I'm really bored." And so I'm not a game guy by nature, so I decided to write a game for him, though, so he wouldn't be bored in the ar. And that's how Flipside 5 came to be about. And I started doing so let me say this. We're based in Northern Virginia. We're 5 people. We have 2 engineers, 2 graphics guys, and a business person. And these are our apps that we currently have. Most of them are on the iPhone and iPad at this point. They're all universal. Okay. So Flipside 5 and how I got started. I came out with 2 web games in the 4th quarter of 2007. And they were featured by Apple. Apple had kind of a mini App Store web version of that at the time. And those were successful enough that I knew that something was going to be big with this device. We were getting something I was getting 30 million hits a month or so, and this was December 2007. So I knew enough to know that doesn't happen every day. So when in March of 2008, Apple had announced that they're going to be coming out with the App Store. They decided to make these games and another game available when the App Store launched. And so we had those games available and actually started incurring some revenue. The revenue model at that time was just traditional paid. We changed the pricing around, but they were between $1 and $5. Okay, so things were going well. I was consulting at the time. I quit my consulting job in August 2008 to do this full time now. And of course, that's right when revenue went from something significant to almost nothing, when people just learned how to jailbreak their phones and steal apps. And so that was an issue. So what happened at that point was just move to a free-to-play model. And we were one of the first companies to do that. And we did that by making our apps free and using ads. Our web games had used ads, and so that's what we did for this at this time. And then our first app that we released as a free-to-play was Touch Hockey. And that was very successful. We had 1 million downloads in the first 10 days, which is still very good. But in 2008, that was something we were very proud of. And by November of 2008, we had over 2 million downloads. All right, so I'm just going to talk briefly a little bit about winning approaches. So this is about winning in the App Store. And just actually touched on this briefly. There's this quality over quantity approach that can be taken. You've seen this, such as Imanji with their Temple Run series. They are very much and we are of that same. We take the same approach where whatever we do, we want to make it a best of breed approach, and make sure that it's actually the absolute best that it can be. And we try to monetize as well as we can on each of our games as well. There's other companies that are still very successful that take a different approach, and they do a kind of a quantity over quality. And so there's other companies that will have maybe a game that does $30, $40 a day, but they have 100 or 150 of those apps. And so that adds up. And so that's a very viable approach. And generally with those kinds of apps, they're outsourced. Generally, they can get development of that entire app done for maybe $10,000 or so. And then they change the theme on it, right? One's cats, one's dogs, one's green, one's red, things like that. And I'm not trying to say which one is better. I mean, obviously I have a preference, but I'm not trying to say one's better, but those are two winning approaches that have been viable in the App Store. Okay. Also, starting a company and funding it, there's two approaches. One is being self-funded. And what I've seen out in the App Store is people that start companies and then are self-funded, they're generally developers or they're experts in that certain vertical, whether it's healthcare or financial or fitness. They're experts in that field. I have an engineering background. I did games, and it was very similar in other people that have been in the App Store for a long time. The other approach is to do angel investing or get professional investment through venture capitals. And this can help you can build a team much more quickly. The downside is sometimes what happens is you end up chasing money for a longer period of time than you're actually building your product. So those are some trade-offs that you have to do. Building an app is, someone told me this, and it really struck home to me one time. There's 4 major pillars or legs to the stool, if you will, when building any kind of app. I do games, so I'll have a bit of a game focus here, but one is revenue model, which I'm going to get into in just a little bit. But your business model, how you make money, is obviously very important. User value in the game world, we would call this gameplay. And then your code. Are you going to write it in Objective-C? Are you going to use Unity? How good is it? How can it be maintained? How quickly can you add features? And then graphics and sounds. Right? So whatever app you do, you have to do these. And you have to think about these. You have to innovate on these. And you have to keep improving on these. And building an app is a marriage of all 4 of these components together and making the right trade-offs. So revenue model, people ask me all the time, somebody will come up to me and say, I've got an idea for an app, it does X, Y, Z, how do I make money? And obviously you want to have a lot of users and you want to be able to monetize on that app well. So traditionally, you have your product revenue, which is traditionally your $4.99 app or your 99-cent app or whatever, and in-app purchases. That's what's defined as product revenue. And then you could also get advertising revenue. That's through banner ads. You'll see Apple's got their iAd, Google has their system. And then you also have incentivized offers through Tapjoy. And I'm going to talk a little bit this in when I talk about freemium revenue model. SessionM is another one, which has been much more successful, monetized much better than banner ads has done. And so at Flipside 5, we went through this transition of where we went from doing paid apps to we went with free apps with ads and in-app purchases. The in-app purchases essentially just turned the ads off. And now everything we do is freemium. And so what is freemium? How many people here have know what freemium is? Just raise your hands. All right, excellent. Okay, so I'm going to just kind of go through this very quickly. But essentially freemium is, it's free, there's virtual currency and virtual goods. And that's important to know because you can incentivize user engagement. So you can reward users through virtual currency for participating in certain actions. So for example, during gameplay, you can give them virtual currency. With Tapjoy, for example, if with that kind of advertising, you can give them virtual currency if they like someone's Facebook page or download an app, etc. Okay. And freemium is really important. It was a really big turning point in our industry, particularly in mobile. I'll give an example here on Farmville, which is one of the most well-known freemium games. This game done by Zynga, has obviously done very well. But you always see the same spike, the same curve, which is that about 1 to 2% of all users will spend any money at all. And we've seen that across all of our games. Regardless of the game, it's always between that 1 to 2% window. And Zynga has said, because they're now public, they have to disclose certain data now, that 0.7% of all the users spend any money at all. Now, the ones that do spend an average about $140 per year. Okay? So the takeaway is that not many people do spend money, but those that do spend a lot of money. Now, I was talking with an investor at one point, and he didn't invest, but I was talking to him, and he was familiar with Zynga, and this was a turning point for me. He said the most amount of money any one person has ever spent on Farmville is over $1 million. Right? I asked that to people, how much do you think is the most amount of money anybody's ever spent on Farmville? And people will be, I don't know, $100. I don't know, $5,000. And there have been dozens that have spent over $100,000 just on Farmville. And so the freemium model is can be very lucrative, okay? But and it's not to say that if you do a freemium model that it will be successful, but that it does monetize well. Okay, so when you're building an app, what are some of your goals? You're building an app because it's something that represents you and what you're passionate about, and so you want to build something that you're proud of. You want to get users, and how do you do that? You either market your app or have Apple feature you, or both. It's not that complicated. In terms of making money, again, this is not complicated. Even if you have an app that doesn't have a lot of users, if it only has 5 users, that's fine. What you want to do is be able to, the amount of marketing that it takes to acquire a new user, you want that to be less than the amount of money that we will make off that, on average, off a new user. So if it takes, let's say, $1 to acquire a user on average, you want to make sure that you can make more than $1 per user. So also people ask me, how long is it, I have an idea, I want to build a game or an app, and I want to make sure it's successful. Some tips that I usually tell people is that it should be about 3 to 6 months. If it's longer than 6 months, you're either not building the right thing, or you don't have the right team, or it can't be built, or something's not right. And just for business reasons, you just can't be funding something that will take longer than that. And you should have a clear vision of what you want it to do. Following the 80-20 rule, you want to be kind of in that 80% zone of what it looked like. And those 4 pillars I talked about are the 4 legs of the stool: revenue model, user value, code, and graphic sounds. You want to make sure that you keep iterating on those and making all the right trade-offs. And you definitely don't want to try to fit everything in version 1.0. You want to make sure that what you're doing for version 1.0 is sound, right? So that's essentially what you want that to be. And also, and this is common sense, you want to reduce the friction to monetize. You want to make sure that where the user goes to do their in-app purchases or click on their banner ads, etc., isn't 5 screens deep, that it's up in front and center. Okay, and this other tip, try again without trying too much. Again, this is just kind of a reiteration of don't try to fit everything in version 1.0. Make sure that you do a great job, but that when you develop an app, your ideas will get better, and you'll probably, by the time you do version 1, you'll know what the next generation app will look like. But don't try to fit all that right away. And for existing apps, things to note, the holiday season is very, very important. It's very much the most important event of the year. And there's definitely seasonality to your revenue. The holidays is by far the most, and during the summer is the least. Also, we've had the opportunity to have our games launched when Apple's come out with a new device. So we had, for example, 2 games when the iPad 1 was launched. And surprisingly, not in hindsight, it wasn't a surprise, but It was not a very significant event. And the reason it was not a significant event was because there weren't any users, because it was the first day it launched. So that was a lesson learned there. Right? Apps you either need a lot of users or you need to have it monetized well per user. And really my advice would be to have it monetized well on a per user basis. And we are a predominantly iOS company. We do have apps on Android that we did, and without going into the details why we did that, it just doesn't monetize very well. And there's a statistics that I read that out of the all App Store revenue market share, iOS App Store has over 80% market share. And so essentially what that means is for every 5 Android users, that equals 1 iOS user in terms of revenue from the App Store. All right? So that's it. I'll hand over to the next speaker, and then we'll have our panel.
So our final speaker is Lux Chen, and Lux Chen is a partner at Esper Labs. He is a small indie game studio in Seattle. His team is now working on a new fantasy game on iOS for release in the next few months. And before that, he developed Vegas Towers, a tower building simulation game with one other developer. And it was downloaded more than 2 million times and charted to number 3 in US top grossing. Before that, Lux played mid-stakes poker and worked at Amazon. So welcome, Lux.
Hello. Wow, okay. So hello, my name is Lux, and I'm an independent games developer. I sort of operate at a much smaller scale than the previous 2 speakers, and really my situation's a lot more desperate than theirs. So I've really only been doing app development for about 2 years. And in those 2 years, I've had the opportunity to work on a couple of apps with pretty varying degrees of traction and financial success. The one app that basically has kept us going and funds our apartment and our studio is this one, which is Vegas Towers HD. It was an app that we launched in 2011 for the iPad, actually. And I developed it with one other friend of mine over about 8 months, and essentially you get to manage a Vegas resort. So you build shops, restaurants, nightclubs, etc. And with it, we were able to achieve about, I think now it's about 2.5 million installs, and we've been steadily making improvements to the game, and so around when we last updated the game, our average revenue per user was about $1. And we, I think altogether, spent about $50,000 in marketing. And that was mostly because that was all we had in our bank accounts and our credit card limits. So basically, this talk is going to be pretty random. It's just some stuff that we learned along the way about how to do sustainable indie game development. And basically, all of it is through trial and horrendous error. So the first thing is, and I should say, basically, I'm only familiar with the freemium games market. So I basically know nothing about how to market or how to make paid apps. I don't know much about like productivity apps or anything else. So sort of the focus is on freemium. And I think one very common thing that I myself have done, and a lot of indie devs do with their first game, is they sort of have the mindset, okay, I'm going to make a freemium game, and it's going to be like a puzzle game, or it's going to be a pretty simple game, and I'm going to give away a lot of levels for free, and then offer an add-on pack for like $1 or $2 that will contain like an extra 100 levels. And so there are a couple problems with this approach, because as Michael mentioned, very few percentage of your users will actually convert to paid. And so let's say that a miracle happens and you make this puzzle game and you somehow get 10 million downloads, which is like pretty insane for a solo developer or a small team. If 5%, which is also the best case scenario, convert to paid and buy the $1 on add-on pack, then for 10 million users, you've only made $500,000. And so if you subtract, salaries, server costs, and all the marketing that you've done to get to 10 million users, that's really not a lot of money. And so that model doesn't work that well. And you can kind of see why by making an analog to real life, where if, let's say you're buying an ebook or like a web series or a TV series online on iTunes, normally you get the pilot episode or you get chapters 1 through 3 for free, and that's it, right? And based on that, you make your purchase decision to buy the rest of the content. If you're at Costco, the sample dude gives you like a tiny piece of whatever they're selling, and based on that tiny taste, you buy like 48 hamburger patties. So, if your goal is to make money, you just can't give away too much for free. And that sounds kind of mean, but that's got to pay the bills. And so really what you want is you want to maximize the amount of money that you're getting from each user who's actually willing to pay you. And a couple other ways of doing that are designing your game with empathy. And what I mean by that is before you make your own game, actually go and play the top 25 top grossing games on iOS, right? And see what makes them work. And a lot of times what you realize is the things that make money aren't the things that you'd expect. Like, for me personally, all my life I've been playing games, and I'm like a pretty hardcore gamer. I've actually lost 2 years of my life to World of Warcraft. So when I go and approach game design and putting in IAPs into a game, I'm like, okay, well, what IAPs should I put in the game that'll help players the most, right? Like what helps them progress, what blocks their progress, et cetera. And that sometimes isn't the way to think about it, because a good example of this is there's a software company called Valve, and they did an experiment a couple years ago where they launched a game called Team Fortress 2, which is basically a very violent version of Capture the Flag. And so initially, it was just like box software that you download from Steam, which is their distribution platform. And I forget exactly how much they were charging for it, but like $20 or something. And so, they had moderate success with that. But then what they did was they decided to do an experiment, and they made the game free. And they had in-app purchases where you could buy hats for your character. And so these hats did not impact gameplay at all. Like they look ridiculous, and there were like a bunch of different hats that you could buy for different prices. Like you paid $20 for a hat. And what happened was their distribution skyrocketed. Like a lot more people got the game, and also the revenues became a multiple of what they were. So people are more willing to buy hats than they are to pay for that don't affect their gameplay at all. Right? And people are more willing to do that than they are to actually buy a game that they're going to have fun with. So being able to have the mindset of a user who spends money is important. And to do that, you have to play other games, and you have to talk to people, and you have to really understand what people are willing to spend money for. And finally, if you're going to have a game that has IAPs, you need to have enough in the game to support the purchase of stuff, right? So if you have a puzzle game, maybe you need a lot of different puzzle packs. If you have a simulation game, you have to make sure there's enough content to warrant players actually needing the stuff that they buy to progress in the game. If you're going the hat route, just make sure you have a lot of different, panda hats, like just a lot of hats, right? Just have enough stuff. And that's just sort of the value argument. Like if you're going to sell stuff, don't sell crap. Like actually sell something. Yeah. So the other thing that I think not enough indies do is they sort of build the game in isolation, and they're like, I got this cool idea, I'm just going to build it and launch it, and it's hopefully going to do awesome, and I'll just make money, and then I'll work on my next game. The problem there is that I think it's very difficult to make a game that monetizes well right off the bat. And so a lot of development is actually done after the game launches to optimize how the game plays, to optimize how the game makes money. And to do that, you need analytics. And most of the big companies, and Zynga and EA and a lot of the other guys, they've spent like a vast amount of resources building up analytics teams that basically can track every action of every user. And based on that, they know how users interact with their games, what causes users to pay, and how to remove bottlenecks from getting users to go down those paths that lead them to pay. So for a while, this was a huge advantage for the big companies that indies really couldn't get for themselves. But now there's tools out there that can give you that power. And so as an indie, you want to record gameplay events, like completing a level, or beating a boss, or any number of things, completing a puzzle. And so you can use things like Flurry, or AppSolar, or Mixpanel. There's a lot now. And so you just pick a tool and you record that data. And based on that, you can identify the points of purchase in your game. Like maybe it's level 7 that causes players to somehow stumble into a situation where they're encouraged to spend money. Or maybe it's if they get to this screen with a special offer, they'll want to spend money. And when you record events and identify the points of purchase, what that lets you do is that lets you remove roadblocks that lead the user down to that point of purchase. So, for example, if you find out that at level 7, that's where users buy stuff, right? But you look at your log of gameplay events and you see that at level 5, for whatever reason, a lot of people who get to level 5 don't get to level 6. Then you need to go and fix that. And it's either because level 5 is too hard, or because the app crashes at level 5, or any number of reasons. But it lets you see exactly where you're losing users. And this is something that, in order to compete, you basically have to do. And once you have those pieces in place, you kind of feel powerful, because now you have enough data such that you feel like you can turn the knobs and you can adjust constants in your game and see revenues rise or fall as a result. And as an example, this is sort of an inadvertent example. Our highest grossing week for Vegas Towers happened at a time when we had this, so we have a server backend for the game, and it was being flooded because we didn't expect to get the amount of traffic we did. And so for about a week, our database was tossing out one out of every 3 updates. And when you play our game, you tap on structures to collect money from them. And so what it meant was 1 out of every 3 money collection events was failing. So basically, players were getting a lot less money. And that also happened to be our highest revenue per user week, right? And so, there was the discussion internally about whether or not we should just reduce the amount of money that every structure gave you by 33%. But the problem there, and something that I sort of urge, is you have all this power now, and you can be really evil. Like, you can be as evil as, Zynga, for example. But like, you're an indie developer, right? Like, you got into this because you love making games, and you have a brand that presumably you want to protect, and you want to be doing this for a long time. And so those are all reasons for not being as evil as you can be, and sort of planning for the long term and building a relationship with the users that you've built up, and keeping them. Another thing that's been happening is, I think for many, many years, I always hear the complaint that, man, I just don't get it. Like, the free app store is just like filled with crap. Like, I don't understand how these companies make money. Their games are crap, like they're not fun, etc. And that has some truth, but it's rapidly getting less crappy. Overall, production value for games, in particular, are increasing, and that's because there's more competition. It's because there's more engines that you can use and license, like Cocos 2D or Unity. And so it's easier to be more productive, and it's easier to make games that look and feel great. And even the crappy games that are out there today, they're less crappy than the crappy games that were out there last year, and so on and so forth. And so there's, like, if you take a look at I think the top grossing game right now on iOS is Clash of Clans, and I urge you all to play that because it's actually a really good game. It kind of looks like other freemium games, but it plays really well. It's actually fun. It's not just like this UI over a monetization model. Like, you actually feel like you're having fun playing the game. And there's just fewer gimmicks. Like, there's not many iBeers or iFarts that really get up in the charts anymore. So you as an indie, you can also get high production value by using the engines that are out there, and you can also get good art. By getting good art, that means not using something like Elance or Craigslist or 99 Designs. That means going out there to places where artists actually hang out, right? And so we managed to get some of our art from people that we found off of DeviantArt and also Newgrounds. And those are two great places where actual artists actually hang out, and you can get in contact and work with them. I recently played a game that's currently on the top grossing 25. I don't want to say what it is because it's pretty bad, but it has a unique property of not letting me play the game. And this is because when I launch the app, and I'm on 3G, I'm not on Wi-Fi. When I launch the app, it starts downloading an update. But it takes so long that the phone goes to sleep, right? And then when you turn on the phone again, the app doesn't wake up properly, so the app restarts. And after the app restarts, it did not save your download progress, so it has to start re-downloading the same update. And so this is actually an infinite loop. Like, you can't actually ever play the game unless you're on a Wi-Fi connection that's fast enough to support that download within the sleep time. And so that's an example of something that you should avoid. That's the extreme example. Less extreme examples are, like, if your app is if it feels unresponsive, like if it just doesn't feel crisp and the animations aren't smooth, those are all things that can drive users away. And with a paid app, if your app kind of sucks, you can kind of overcome that with clever marketing. And once the user buys the app, like, you have the money, so whatever, right? But with the freemium model, like, once they get the app, that's when it starts, right? Like, your game actually has to be good enough and engaging enough to cause the user to want to spend time and want to spend money with your app. And so a related point is, at this point, it's basically inexcusable for your app to crash, at least on iOS. A crash is really, really bad because in addition to basically losing a user right off the bat, more often than not, the 1-star reviews and the 2-star reviews you'll see for your app on the App Store are basically bug reports, right? They're some angry user who is playing your game and the app crashed and they can't get back to where they were. And so to give you feedback, because they don't know how else to give you feedback, they'll leave a 1-star review and then basically give you a bug report as the text of that review. And so that's really bad. And that's completely avoidable. There's tools out there. So we use a tool called Criticism. And they basically get bundled with your app as an SDK. And every time an app crashes, it sends a report to you, the developer. And you can see the exact stack trace of, like, what caused that crash. And so you can fix that. So quality is important. So for a small outfit with basically no marketing budget, you have to resort to guerrilla tactics. And that's what this next section is about. So the App Store resembles GameStop in that there's basically a limited amount of shelf space, right? It's like the top 200 for overall and the top 200 for your category. And so there's enough big guys out there now that you can't possibly hope to match their spending. And so you can't hope to permanently displace an existing player unless your app is, like, obscenely good. So that's where burst versus sustained spending comes in. Most big players spend a high level of money constantly to keep their app at a certain place. So you don't have that, but what you do have is you don't have the next item, which is saturation disadvantage. A lot of the games that are out there now, they've been downloaded so many times that they're basically rate limited by the number of new devices that are activated every day, right? Whereas for you, everyone who has a device could possibly download and play your game. And so what you can do is, instead of doing sustained spending, you can burst your spending. And so this is spending on things like AdMob, Tapjoy, W3I, iAds, like all these different sources of installs that you can get. And what you want is you want to dump all your money in, like, one short 2 or 3 day window, so that if this is the level of spending that the big guys can do, you can like have a short spike. And what that spike does is it gets you in the charts. And once you're in the charts, you start getting organic downloads. And what you can do is you can ride the chart down gently. And so if you look at the install graph for Vegas Towers, we basically did exactly that. And it's basically a sharp spike, and then we write it down, and then another sharp spike, and then we write it down, and so on and so forth. And more recently, another source of good traffic is cross-promotion. So cross-promotion works by either you working directly with another developer, and you just say, OK, I'm going to display an ad for your app in my game, and vice versa, right? And now there are also platforms that do that for you. A couple, I think one is Chartboost, and another, I think I saw a poster outside for a company called AppBacker, and apparently they do sort of the same thing. There's a caveat with cross-promotion that is very unfortunate, and that is that most companies that engage in cross-promotion, they themselves use analytics. So they will only ever display your ad to their users who have demonstrated that they will not pay. So they're basically sending you all the junk users, right? And you're sending them like legitimate users. And the way to fight that isn't to send them useless users back. The way to fight that is to don't treat cross promotions as real installs. Use that in your burst, right? And use that to help you chart so that you can ride that wave down and get the organics. Another thing to avoid is holiday madness. So if you're like a really small guy and you don't have any presence, then basically you can't hope to match the level of spending that other companies do during the holidays. And it's truly absurd. Like the prices for advertisements, the prices for installs go up 10x. And a lot of that in previous years was due to something called the Apple App Store freeze, where they actually froze the position of apps on the charts for something like 5 or 6 days. And so there was this insane rush to get in on the top 25 before that freeze happened. And it's unclear whether or not that's going to continue, but that is something that it's a phenomenon that you should be aware of. And then finally, if you're going to do press for your app, there's a lot of games now. I think, hello? Can you guys still hear me? Okay. So with the press, there are so many games now where you really have to say something with your game in order to get a lot of press. So whether it's you have insanely good audio, or your story is really good, or your game just evokes a certain feel, whatever it is, it's good to have an angle for your game, something that really is different. And that helps you get written about. And when you go out and reach out to press, again, try to compress that all into a very narrow time frame so that you can use it to ride up the charts. Finally, as I mentioned before, a lot of the development for a game happens after the launch of the game. And so this pre-launch should actually read post-launch, but what you want to do is you want to launch in one country, say Canada or the UK, that sort of is similar to the US demographic, but is a lot smaller. And once you launch it, don't do a lot of marketing. Just get the trickle of organic installs and just A/B test the hell out of everything, right? This is where you can eliminate crashes. This is where you can figure out the different paths to causing users to make a purchase and optimize those paths. This is when you A/B test your app icon and your screenshots. And I think with iTunes Connect, you can change your screenshots at any time, but you can't change your app icon without submitting an update to Apple. But you can get around that by doing banner ads and displaying different icons on banner ads and seeing which banner ad gives you the best return, and then selecting that as your icon for the next test. And just in general, you want to make sure that you have the game in as good a state as possible before you launch it to the rest of the world. And that's sort of it. That's the end of my spiel. So if you have any questions, I'll be up there in a short bit, but also you can email me, and I'll do my best to respond. Thank you.
All right. So we're all going to come back over here. And please tweet us your questions, and we will try to answer them.
All right.
So there's been a lot of great talks up here about how to win in the App Store from large companies and small companies. And I think most of the people in the crowd are actually small. So one thing that I wanted to ask all of you is what number of users do you need to see before you see sustainable revenue? Or actual revenue that you're like, oh, there's actual revenue coming in from this game or from this app. Especially for the freemium model. If you can kind of speak to that a little bit.
So I'll speak to that a little bit. So on our freemium games particularly, we look at how much revenue we make on average per daily active user. So for example, in the freemium world, right, there's these terms LTV, lifetime value, and then there's, so we want to make sure that our estimated lifetime value is somewhere like over $1.50, right? And then we look at how much money we're making on a daily active. And really, going back to what Lex was saying, version 1 is almost like a beta, in terms of monetization at least. And it's a very iterative process to, like one of our games, Touch Tanks, which by the way, the Wreck-It Ralph, right? There was an interview in the Washington Post. He said his favorite game, the main character in Wreck-It Ralph, he said his favorite game to play is Touch Tanks, which is one of our games, by the way. But that aside, we've been working on that game since 2009, and we only now are kind of hitting at a good pace with that in terms of revenue per daily active. So, but anyway, to go back to your question, that's kind of what we look at it nowadays. And then right from there, we can then spend the marketing dollars.
Yeah, I would echo what Michael says. So it's not really about the total amount of revenue that you see coming in, in X number of days in the App Store. We do very much what both Lux and Michael have talked about, which is we often, for a freemium game, will geo-beta in Canada, as Lux was saying, and it is all about, the ARPDAU and the LTV and ensuring that you're bringing in more money than you're putting out, right? And it is very iterative. In that initial test, we like to see, enough users that we are getting a statistically significant measure, right? So maybe that's 20,000 or 30,000. And we'll run that beta for a good 3 weeks or a month while we're addressing bugs and tuning the economy. And then when we go broad, we of course continue to iterate and tune the entire while. And then it takes quite a while, right? After that, it still would be a matter of probably weeks and months before you really have a feel as to whether you have optimized sufficiently and whether you want to continue to put a lot of effort behind this title or not.
Do you want to speak to that, Lex, or?
Okay. Basically echoing what they said, but yeah, before you max out the credit cards, just make sure that you're earning more than you're spending. Usually you want to have, I think, average revenue per user of about 25 cents or so more than what you're spending to get that user, and that's sort of a safe number to go by.
So we had a question from Twitter. Any experience with subscription-based revenue versus freemium? Have you found subscription to be effective at all? Have you ever tried any of this? The answer for any of you?
I was told, this was maybe about, I'll say, a year and a half ago or so. I asked someone at Apple specifically, we're going to try potentially a subscription model. And they told me that was against the terms and conditions for games, and it was only applicable for Newsstand and maybe some other things, but it was against the policy for games. So obviously we never tried it from that point.
Similarly, I know that there are business units at Disney that are interested in using subscription models for things that come close to being a game, but are subscriptions out in the world on the internet. But nobody actually has implemented that yet, and definitely not Disney Mobile Games.
Okay. So one question that I kind of wanted to sort of open up a little bit is, if it's no longer, since it's no longer early and 20% of the apps now make 97% of the revenue. What advice do you guys have for someone who is just starting out and really wants to break in to making their app business a sustainable one?
So I think in many ways, the indie gold rush is getting harder and harder. So you really have to decide why it is that you're doing it. It takes a good amount of time to make and optimize a good game that's going to make money. And so if your only goal is to make money, you should just go be a quant on Wall Street instead. And you really have to have a capacity for doing hard creative work and possibly not getting anything out of it other than the journey, in order to actually have the mindset that will let you create something that's good enough to sustain you. And I mean, I often talk with my partners, and we're aware of the fact that our next game might be a bust and we'll have to go work somewhere. But for as long as we have this shot, it's not because we hope to make money out of this. It's because all our lives we've wanted to make games, and this is one of the first, maybe the only opportunity in our adult lifetime where a very small team of people can make something that is really enjoyed by like millions and millions of people. So that's something to keep in mind.
So do you guys talk to your users and your guests so that you understand what makes them spend money or what makes them like your apps, and really tune your apps based on that? And how much time do you think you spend talking to people? How do you talk to people?
I'll take this one first. Yeah, we absolutely talk to our guests. And we do it a number of different ways, right? So being that we're Disney, we have some that are unsustainable for smaller companies. So we actually do have telephone technical support or telephone customer service, which is, wow, ancient. But people do call in and get help with our titles, and we do record, what their experiences have been and what they're having difficulty with. We do more modern versions of customer support via Zendesk and Get Satisfaction. Tap Tap Revenge, in particular, has always had a really lively community that we manage through Facebook and Twitter. And then in addition, we do a lot of user testing, both play testing and usability testing. We bring users in, sometimes just a couple at a time if we want to do a really intense session with them where we're watching every move they make and asking them questions as they go. Sometimes we bring in a couple dozen people, and we do them in groups of 8 at a time, and we have them run through the first half hour of play of the game, and we'll record what they're doing on video cameras, and so we can play back the sessions and see how were they interacting with the title, what were they stumbling over, what were they particularly enjoying, and then at the end of those group sessions, we always have a Q&A where we ask them certain questions that we want the answers to, and we run our titles through those tests routinely, probably bi-weekly for some titles that are in development. And so it's constant feedback loop as we sort of move from alpha through to beta and a final ship product. And then, of course, we continue to iterate after we ship.
Okay, so I'll just tell a very quick story here. Our Touch Tanks game, which I mentioned earlier, we had started ship version 1 in 2009. We just shipped version 4 earlier in 2012. And what happened was it had a very hardcore user base. Not the largest user base of our games, but it had a very hardcore user base. And there was some guy, one of our users, he created this Touch Tanks Facebook page. And he started getting other users to like it, and had started these tournaments, which we had no idea. We actually found this later. And now there's this entire community out there on Facebook. And so the bottom line is what we learned from that was we use Facebook now to interact with a lot of our users. And then some of those users we do use for beta testing when we're coming out with new features.
What was the question again?
The question was, do you spend your time talking to users? Because I know you probably did.
We did a little bit just through a lot of our users actually emailed us because we had this form in our game that allowed users to email us bugs. We did that initially because we wanted players to do that instead of giving us a 1-star review. And we actually got into regular email discussion with a couple of our superpower users.
and they went on to become beta testers for our current game, so that was kind of useful. But in general, we didn't have enough time to really do as much of that as we wanted to for our previous game, and we actually probably won't have enough time for our new game, but at some point it'd be nice to devote more manpower and time to that.
So I have a quick question from Twitter for Lux. You had suggested A/B testing icons and screenshots in Canada, and do you mean changing over time, or is like the US A and Canada is B?
So just in Canada, like have 3 screenshots for 2 days, see how many installs you get, see what your chart position is, and then switch out one of the screenshots or switch out all the screenshots, and then measure it again for another couple of days. And you probably want to schedule it so that you're doing the same period of time over a week. So like maybe Tuesday through Friday, week 1, Tuesday through Friday, week 2, and so on and so forth, and avoid holidays. And yeah.
That's a good idea.
So I have a quick question. So the marketing spend, is it better at launch or after the apps have been out? What seems to give you the best sort of bang for the buck?
Well, we do a mixture. So as these guys have said, and I'll reiterate, the idea is only spend what you can in an ROI positive fashion, right? So as long as the return on the investment is positive, keep spending. And that's a great thing. Now that we all have analytics and we can all sort of see how much we're earning from any given set of users, it actually levels the playing field, right? Because it used to be, back when we were just sort of starting Tapulous, we didn't have the ability to introspect in that way into the titles, and so you kind of had to blindly spend money to chart them. There weren't all that many services you could spend on to chart them anyway, but we were an angel-funded startup and really bootstrapping and running scrappy, and so we had like $0 marketing budgets. At Disney, obviously, our budgets can be much larger, but still the whole mantra is ROI positive, ROI positive, ROI positive. We do not do ROI negative spends. And so you can spend it anytime, right? So typically, we'll try to spend a bunch up front to chart, because it's really important to get that visibility. But once you've got the visibility, then you measure, and you only keep spending if it's a positive result for your balance sheet, right?
And for us, we've talked before about this iteration process. Version 1 is when we do not do any marketing, because there is so much that we need to understand, 1, technically, and 2, from a monetization perspective before we're going to dump marketing dollars in to push it. Especially for these freemium games, I'm sure it's probably for you guys too. We have as much back-end server security stuff as probably like any financial app has, and so we have to make sure that that's intact and is robust before we put the marketing dollars to scale up. So version 1 is not version 101, maybe. Version 1.1 probably so. Version 2 maybe so, right?
There's sort of an irony in that Apple typically, if they decide to feature an app, it's better if it's a newer app. But that's also the time when your app is immature and not monetizing as well as it can be. And so if you're given the opportunity to work with Apple on a promotion, you sort of have to, decide, do I dump all my marketing dollars now on the app when I get a marketing boost from Apple, but it's also not monetizing as well as it could be? Or do I save my money for later and just get a little bump from Apple, but don't ride it all the way?
So we have another question from Twitter. Not crashing is pretty important, but sometimes it happens. What technologies do you use to report crashes or console logs, etc.?
We're on Criticism, just like Lux.
Same.
Congrats, Criticism. That's pretty good press.
They were supposed to come today, but I don't know if they're here. Another question from Twitter. How does Disney Mobile deal with COPA in terms of ad spends with games like Where's My Water?
That's a very good question, and I'm going to tread very lightly, or Disney Legal will have my head on a platter. So I'll speak more generally than to the specific example that was given. I play a role in managing this process at Disney Mobile Games, both from a technical perspective as well as a business strategy perspective. And what I feel personally, not speaking for Disney, is the best maneuver for our business to limit risk is to not target kids with our titles. And so as long as the as long as the game is not determined to be kid targeted by our legal department or by the outside world, then COPPA compliance doesn't apply, right? I mean, obviously we're still being responsible to our users' privacy and security, and we take great care with that. But the specifics to how you treat kid data only apply if you're targeting children. And so Disney Mobile Games tries not to target children. So Where's My Water is determined to be an all ages game. Most of our titles are all ages titles.
Next question, where are the 3 best places to spend marketing dollars?
All right, so I'll start. So I'd say for us, iAd is definitely not it. Tapjoy is very good. It's very fruitful. It can be expensive, specifically during the holidays. It can get really crazy. I think like last year was something people were spending like $50,000 an hour in advertising. So we were not one of those people. Tapjoy and Chartboost primarily is what we do now, Tapjoy being the vast majority of it for our marketing dollars.
Yeah, so we've also had pretty good success with Chartboost. Another thing that we've used in the past before is Free App a Day. They basically highlight one app every day on their website and on their mailing list, and that's a way to quickly get some volume for your app. Although their prices, they keep going up, so it's unclear now whether they're as good a deal as they were before, but still, that's a pretty good source of downloads.
Yeah, and similarly, we partner with 18 different user acquisition companies, including the ones that these guys just mentioned, but a whole bunch of others. And we turn those dials up and down, watching the analytics, right? Watching the business intelligence come in to determine, gee, okay, that partner's spend, we can spend less because they just knocked their price down and we're going to get more out of these guys. And so we have a team of people, that's the luxury of being at Disney, where their whole job is to optimize the spend with those 18 user acquisition partners. What you can do as an independent developer out there to approximate or approach that would be something that I've always done ever since at Tapulous. I'm actually a little bit allergic to SDKs. So I don't like to put lots of third-party SDKs for things like marketing or even, well, there are a bunch of different reasons you might put, even BI, right? I don't like to put those things in because it ties you to that individual provider in that you're not going to want to put 18 different SDKs for user acquisition, for instance, into one product. That's a lot of weight to put into a product. So I look for partners who have back-end APIs where I can talk to their servers directly from my servers, and that gives me a lot of flexibility. Again, it lets me sort of turn those dials and knobs as quickly as I like, as long as I can spend to keep my back-end up, right? So it's a different sort of spend, but I like the flexibility that it buys us.
Jessica, I have a question for you. So you said you have 18 user. I didn't even know there were 18 user acquisition companies. Do you do banner ads?
Yeah, we sure do. So you name the way in which we might spend money, we might spend it. So yes, we do offer wall stuff, which of course is not for incentivized installs, but it's for being able to buy currency in essence, to earn currency in our games. And then for incentivized installs, we do banners, we do Free App a Day, we do a bunch of other things like that.
So I get the traditional banner ad is in like the iAd, the Google ad, the MobClicks ad, banner ad, those kinds of things.
Yeah, we use Burstly as a mediation layer, and so we're able to, again, that's sort of my allergy to SDKs, right? So I was able to put one SDK in, and yes, they bake a couple of SDKs in with themselves, but actually they have a tremendous number of ad providers that are all server-side from Burstly. And so as long as you've got the Burstly SDK in, they can flip all those knobs. And so that's who we've partnered with for our banner ad delivery.
So just one quick thing. If you do bundle SDKs, it sort of pays to Google the history of that SDK because some marketing SDKs actually crash the app. So just watch out because that's really tragic.
So I think we have time for one more question, and I think this question would be interesting. How important is moving customers or guests between your apps?
Can you repeat the question?
How important is moving customers or guests between your apps? So you come out with a new app. Do you move your customers from one app to the next app?
We obviously try to move everybody to our app, any way possible. I mean, that's the bottom line. We actually originally had our own little internal mini platform, which we put in all of our apps to cross-promote our apps. Every game has got the kind of the more game screen, and we do that, and we will flip a switch on our server so that it will come up when the screen launches to show some of our other apps sometimes. So it is important. I mean, to get users anyway, especially something like that, which is cost effective, is important.
Yeah, 100% important to move people between your apps. Why leave an audience sitting with an aging product when they might be interested in your new offering, right? And if anyone's going to be interested, it's someone who's already a loyal customer of yours. So we definitely do exactly what Michael was talking about in terms of having a platform to be able to do that. In fact, the folks who went and founded Chartboost, what they in part were working on before they left Disney Mobile Games was this very internal platform that we use for cross-promotion. But we've built it out since then to include a nice More Games feature and a few different mechanisms. But definitely we're careful, right? You don't want to push too hard. And we've definitely had situations where we've gotten a little too aggressive with the marketing that we'll do inside of one of our titles. And it's always to push to another title of our own, right? But if you get too aggressive, you'll definitely see immediate user backlash, right? Your star ratings will drop fundamentally right away. And so you have to sort of tread lightly and keep measuring and watch for all the signs of health in your app. But as long as you're not affecting your app's health in terms of your core metrics for quality and for monetization, then absolutely it's hugely important to move people around.
All right, great. So thank you very much for your attention this afternoon, and thanks to all of our speakers.